Thanks so much for being here, Anna.
It's my pleasure.
On your podcast a few months ago now, we spoke for like it was a good few hours,
Mm.
and we've spoken ever since then, and kept in touch. I just felt like it was the time was right to now to turn the tables and for me to ask you all the questions.
Put
But
me on
yeah,
the hot seat.
yeah, exactly. Um, I feel like there's so much to talk about, but the conversation at first, I guess, got us um talking about stuff that was really close to your heart and at the same time controversial was this whole notion of diversity and inclusion. And so it'd be good to get your lens on how you think the world perceives diversity and inclusion right now. But it'd be good to just get a little bit of your backstory because we haven't done an episode before. So for people who are listening to this for the first time, whatever you feel is important, it would be great for you to share that, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, thanks for having me here. So my story, I live with a kind of a long term kind of complex conditions, and I'm a wheelchair user. Um, and at the same time, I don't necessarily like to, as you know, I don't like to define myself by that. But at the same time, I recognise it's part of my life, and I'm living in the world through that lens. When I was 17, my life changed overnight. I became very, very unwell. And when I mean like unwell, we're talking like going from being this like wild child teenager that I was, like doing everything, to literally being practically bedbound for months on end. And as you can imagine, you're 17, it was a very dark time in my life. And it was also quite shocking in the sense that I think when it happened, I actually had felt so bad that I could barely process what was happening to me at the same time. And this led me on a journey of healing, personal development. I already had a spiritual background. The backstory is I'd already been into like spirituality, yoga, tantra since I was probably around 11, 12. Like, I don't particularly know where it came from. My parents weren't really into it, but I was into it, and it was kind of readily accepted amongst all my friends, that I had this really weird side as well, the angel cards, all of that stuff. So I had that background, and really, when I was in this really difficult, challenging place, the only thing I really had, once I was able to kind of start considering, okay, what can I do with this situation? Because at this point, medical doctors, this was in the year like 2000, like life was very different then, in everything from medical, how we perceived things. It was like, we don't know what to do with you. So my mum and I embarked on, acupuncture, and I was looking at all, I started to, as soon as I could really start to focus a little bit more, start to read some like self-help books and see if I could like help myself. But at the same time, underneath all of this, anybody that goes through a massive trauma listening, um, there's a lot that there's many layers to that, and it's actually taken me many years to understand this with trauma. Like, even with all the personal development and self-help stuff, you sometimes do need to go a little bit deeper. And I think I wasn't quite hitting that space or really facing up to what had happened, in the sense of that everything I knew had gone from me. It was like that whole person had gone, and it was very hard for the people in my life to process that, my friends, my family, and myself. It was like a death almost, but going through that at 17. And that left me with a depression. So I was recovering physically, and then when I was almost physically better to be able to cope with depression, that was what came. And I remember going to the doctors and saying, like, there's something really, really wrong with me. Like, give me something, like, help me. Like, I'm trying everything. And, she was like, look, you've got to look after yourself. But what she did say to me at that time, and it has stuck with me forever, really, she was like, look, you have been through, in a word, um, a death of who you were. You're never going to be that person again, and you need to grieve. And she said, no tablet, no person, no one can help you with that. It has to begin with you. And that felt almost like the permission slip that I needed at the time. But it also was like all my friends were getting on with their regular life. I was, just about functioning at this point. trying to finish my A levels, you know, trying to be as normal as I possibly could and process this. It was a lot. At the same time as all this going on, there was something physical going on with me as well. And it was like I was doing all this alternative stuff. I was trying to be normal. I was processing all of the depression stuff. And one day I found myself in a position where my body was like, look, you're just going to have to stop. And this really took me on that second part of my journey where my friends all went off to university and I didn't. I didn't have the life that I assumed I would have. And that really sucked. If I'm, you know, like I could gloss it up and say it was like a, you know, an amazing, I could give the story of like, oh, you know, at the time I definitely didn't think, despite all, at this point I'd probably read about 50 personal development books, definitely wasn't like, oh, this is happening for a reason. It was like, this really sucks.
Yeah,
uh,
just to add to that, I think when we're going through some type of emotion that is very deep and dark, like for example what you're discussing now about needing to grieve and feeling lonely and isolated and sad, um, to then read self-help books to change your thinking into being positive and all that kind of stuff is great to know as a tool, but it can't be fully used until you acknowledge the emotion. Like it can't be used to cancel out that emotion or to suppress it. It needs to be fully acknowledged and lived,
Absolutely.
and then through that you begin to shift and evolve the energy into one of like being more positive and using that momentum. But
Mm.
until that initial emotion is addressed, it doesn't matter how much positive thinking you do, it's not going to work. I don't
Yeah,
know if you got that sense, because but that's it kind of got me thinking about that, because there's so much of this information that's out there now that can help people. There's countless books and videos and stuff, but you have to acknowledge the
absolutely.
emotions that you're feeling at the time and be present with it, not to escape it by thinking a book is going to help you kind of eradicate that emotion.
Mm. I mean, and I'll be honest with you, that I mean, at the time, obviously, no one around me was into this. It wasn't really what you've just pointed out there. It took me about 3 years to get to the point where I actually had to come to that conclusion myself. Because at this, you know, I when I say I went down the rabbit hole for the next kind of like almost 8 years of my life, countless, you know, from everything from emotional to money to physical. I went on this mission to this obsession, it became, to like what I thought was heal myself. And obviously do a little bit of bypassing in that as well. But about 3 years in, what you've just said about the emotion, I realized one day that it was, you know, I kind of was so obsessed with what was going on in my body because it didn't seem to matter what I was doing. Certain things didn't appear to be working, and this was really, in a word, fucking with my head. And I thought, what can I control here in my life anymore? Anyway, and it was hard because, you know, one thing I can say in all of this, my friends stuck by me like 100%, despite what I was going through. I had really good people in my life. I had good family support. So it was a really weird space to be in. And I know you know what this is like, where you've got love and support, but you still feel alone, because that's what essentially I was going through. And one day it kind of dropped in from kind of actually reading a book called Conversations with God, about thinking about what I really wanted. And I thought, if I strip everything back, what do I really want here? How can I really help myself? And it kind of came through me. I guess it came through me in that moment of it, like kind of peace and inner peace. And I thought, the one thing I can kind of control here is my mind, not in the sense of trying to control in like the controlling way, but the one thing I can really help myself with here in a kind of surrendered way is my mind. And it was really that massive turning point for me. And I think it was where I was able to, then what you said about really beginning to face those dark emotions that I'd been through in that last 3 years, that it was almost like I'd get to the edge of them and then I wouldn't quite go in deep enough because it was just too much for, well, I was a teenager, like, let's be honest, like, you don't expect to go through that at that age, right? Like, nobody does. And also nobody around you is going through it. Nobody really wants to talk about it because they don't understand it. So it was very much like, and obviously different therapies, everybody has their own solution. So you have to strip all of that back as well. But when I made that decision, that changed my life because it allowed me to take my power back in one way that I could. So I worked on, in a word, strengthening my mind. And the journey of my body continued until 10 years in. I constantly always knew something wasn't quite right. And I was given various diagnoses from doctors. And, it was, I knew something wasn't right, but I also knew that I was being kind of passed over, in a word.
So at so just so I'm clear, like so at 17, you didn't need to go into a wheelchair right away. It was
No,
kind of over
I
time
was
you felt there was something wrong and you couldn't quite figure out what it was.
Yeah, so that I kind of started using disability aids probably in my like mid 20s. Now, the caveat here is I probably should have started earlier, um, but it was, no one really wants to go down that. Like, it's not. I lived a really, like, when I started to be able to do more things, it was really messed up because I used to basically go and do things I couldn't actually physically really do very much. So I used to say to everybody, "Oh, you go and do it. I'll just sit here." This went on for years. Um, and it was only actually quite a hardcore, fairly mean ex-boyfriend that we were going away somewhere, and he was like, "Look, for fuck's sake, like, why don't you just get a wheel? Why don't we get a wheelchair?" Like, and obviously he was like, what is the problem here? Like, I don't give a fuck. Like, what's the issue? So I went along with it because deep down, I think I knew he was right. And I remember like we were going to Rome, and when we got there, and genuinely like I traveled a fair amount in between those times, but I'd obviously done not very much during that time. I remember crying in the middle of Rome, and he was like, "Oh my god, what's going on here? Like, why are you fucking crying?" type of thing. And I was like, "This is so amazing. This is like," and that changed my life, if I'm honest with you, because I suddenly realised that sometimes we let certain perceptions, like how people are like think things like that, you're giving in. It wasn't
Mm.
giving in, it was giving me my life back. And I can't even begin to tell you, for anybody that's been on the journey that I've been on so far, how that actually felt. It was like it was wild. It was just the most.
What freeing yourself from worrying about what other people think.
Yeah, and freeing myself from thinking I was giving in to like these
Mm.
disability aids. Like, they were giving me, like, he was right on one thing. He was like, "I feel like it's gonna be pretty damn cool. We're gonna be able to do things together."
Yeah. But
uh,
were you thinking it was a sign of weakness if you
yeah,
were
I
to
was
use
thinking
them?
that. And that, yeah, and also like how the world will look at me. I guess I had to face my own internal, I never can say the word properly. Is it like ableist? I had to face my own internal discriminations about it as well. And obviously what I did learn, which we'll discuss like later on in the podcast, is that, it's not like in your head. People really are. Discrimination is very much
Yeah, yeah.
and even obviously, we learned very early on, and as soon as my friends, everybody who suddenly started being with me learned very early on what it suddenly means to be around somebody in a wheelchair. Just even like how people look at you, how people perceive you, how people treat you. But to be honest, once I realized how good like empowering that made my life, I was able to like totally get over it very quickly. And in the same time as all of that going on, I obviously had this deep inner knowing that something wasn't right. Like, because believe me, by this point, I had exhausted, you name the therapy or the alternative, I had gone, from mental as well. Like, I'd been like taking myself on these like, really intense processes. And I knew something wasn't right. And it was actually my mate on Facebook, who said to me one day when we were chatting, I was talking something about my heart, and he was like, "I don't think this is anxiety, Hannah," because he said, "You've just told me you didn't even feel anxious." He said, "I think you've got this thing called POTS," and he said, "I think you need to go to the doctors." Now, I just thought it was that, to be honest with you. I didn't realise that was just the start. So I went to my GP after he like really worked on me, because he wasn't really into spiritual side of things. He was like scientific. So he gave me the facts. he actually gave me some really like good um, pointers to be able to go into a doctor and not sound like I'd been on Dr. Google, but to be able to go in and be really constructive. And I go to my doctor and tell her, and bear in mind she'd been on this journey with me too, so she was up for, she knew that, she knew deep down something wasn't right as well, but it was like, you know, we just didn't know. And when I told her, she googled it herself because she didn't know, and she was like, I think your mate's right. And so she basically was able, I guess because of like 10 years of not knowing, she got me through the system very quickly. When I mean, like, anyone listening, will understand this. In our system, things are pretty slow. We're talking like months. We're talking
Yeah.
like fast. And when I had all the tests and like when we talked, like it came back like it happened. It was like 100%. You've got this, and also they were like, it's really messed up because you've been doing all like the kind of self-care stuff that we prescribe people before seeing a consultant, but you need to see a consultant now. Something's not right. So when I saw this consultant, he like looked at my whole medical history, and after listening to me, and I do believe I manifested the best consultant ever because I'd not had always the best experiences, and I was very intentional when I went to this to, you know, I was going to stand up for myself. No one was going to put baby in the corner this time. Hell no. I was like no, I was like done almost, like with people trying to, like, you know, especially in the medical establishment. So he was like, I think they've got this really wrong. Like, I think you've got this condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it's genetic. And I then said to him how that my mum had met someone in a changing room. We talk about synchronicities in life. A second cousin, her daughter had been through the same thing as me. It was all on my mum's, yeah. So it was like the penny starting to drop. So he sent me to like the head of genetics, and very quickly it became clear that, you know, this is what was going on. Obviously, 10 years down the line of me pushing myself and doing things had caused like some damage, shall we say, along the way. I didn't know. Like, I was doing the best I could with the information I had. So yeah, and in a way, once it was interesting to have to go through a process of like having to process that, but in kind of the place that I was in with all the work that I'd done, it was like a whole new journey began. And I also had to do like some more work around the work that I'd done about this new experience that I was experiencing. And then I'd say that after that, it really took me on a journey of kind of unpacking a lot of things that I'd learned, really unpacking a lot of the kind of fixed things we get stuck in, even in personal development, spirituality, starting to really understand trauma, my nervous system, and working through that. And yeah, and that led me then to eventually start to share online, start to share my experiences, and, you know, take it from there. But there was, I think, you know, it was a very, when people are like, oh, you know, like we everything, I mean, gosh, like sometimes I have looked back and think, God, I just wish I could have been a normal teenager and life had been normal. I'm not going to lie to you. But at the same time, life happens and we go on these kind of insane journeys. And, you know, I have to look at everything around it. And I also have to look at the privilege and the luck that I did have access to all these things, and I had the courage myself to take myself on those processes, but I also had access to them, and that's been able to support and help me as well. So it's kind of, it's like one of those things, and I know there are lots of people that haven't had that on the journey, similar journeys that I've been on. So
Mm.
you know, I look at it for, I try and find the silver lining from that perspective. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell. I know that's really long. But it's been a long time. It's been like,
Exactly. I don't want to try and make it seem shorter than it needs to be. Like it is
been,
what it is. Like those are all the
absolutely,
important bits.
yeah.
And how old were you by the time you finally got the ED kind of
I kind of knew I was around like 28, 20. So
okay,
like
so it'd be
10,
about just over 10 years
just
by
over
that
10
point.
years, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and it was interesting because when I went to see that, when I actually, the head geneticist who that I ended up going to see, he said something that really struck me. He said, you know, he said, what's interesting to me is you're not more messed up by this. because he'd been seeing a few people with my story coming in, and he said, I'm interested to hear about this, considering everything you've been through. And I said, well, it's like this.
Mm.
I said, I felt a very long time ago I had a choice, and I made that decision to help myself in the ways that I could. But I said to him, I guess everybody's different, and it depends what you have access to, and we all process it. I'd already had that interest and that spark where I wanted, to be honest, like, clearly, if we look, I was already into like spirituality and different things. I would have always been on this path somehow. It's just I got took on a very dark initiation in the way that I didn't quite expect it myself to. shall we
Yeah.
shall we
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
So that, I had that, whereas I guess if you're not really into that and you're going through some really shitty stuff, it probably is going to really, really mess you up. And I was, I put my hands up entirely and say that, God, it's been hard sometimes. And yeah, it did mess me up. There were times, we go through periods of things, and I did go through some times where I felt really messed up. And sometimes my behaviors, I had coping strategies like anybody else. Like, I have absolutely learned the hard way sometimes, and been my own worst enemy. But I think that's part of learning as well.
Yeah, I think everyone is meant to take what they're meant to take from it, and it's not meant to be exactly the same journey for everyone. It feels like it's meant to help enhance that person in their own way. I mean, it's processing those kinds of emotions is going to hit everyone differently, and the way in which they do it and the journey it takes them on and how long it takes is going to look different for everyone.
Absolutely.
So there is no right and wrong way of going through that journey, right? It's just you do the best that you can do.
Yeah.
um how did that affect, if at all, the time? Because in your 20s, most people, at least the background that I came from, most people go to university and then they'll start looking for work and going on that journey. And I wonder what that looked like for you whilst you were on this medical journey of not only self-discovery but figuring out what was actually happening to you until they finally came to that conclusion at 28. What did your life kind of look like up to that point? Because by this point, I assume you would have finished education as well. So, like, how did
Yeah.
you
I
maneuver
mean,
that whole landscape?
that was really, really tough, and it's not something that can ever prepare you for something like that. So I finished education at 18. I did do some like my own, like a few alternative qualify, like I'm a reflexologist and stuff. But really, the truth of it was, I was so like unwell that the full time job I had was to get through the day and be okay. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I had to walk away from people or walked away from situations and burst into tears, and my mum had to regularly deal with it when you'd meet somebody and they'd say, what do you do? And
Mm,
the one thing I think I got very professional at, like, it's like this: if you learn to be able to define yourself without what you do, you've really broken through a really big barrier, because we tend to base our whole lives on, like you say, your 20s. Let's go through the list. You do university, you might go traveling, then you get your relationship. Like, I watched, do you know what I likened it to? It was, for a long period of time, it was like I was watching a movie, and all of this was happening, and I was watching this movie of everybody's lives, and it was a really surreal experience for me to go through. But it was really tough having to, like, as well, like, physically, I actually looked pretty, like, okay from what, like, at one point my body couldn't digest food, so I was very underweight for a few years. But you know people still say you look good when you're skinny. It's pretty fucked up. Do you know what I mean? I never looked, if I'm honest, I never looked ill, even though there were times when, I could have, like, gone out for an hour with my mum, right? And I've been, really, really struggling. But I was just somebody that looked this isn't me saying that I looked like, in like a vain way, but I looked pretty good. And it was I think it was really hard for people to fully, you'd see people and they'd be like, oh, how are you doing? You better now. how do you even begin to say to people? And I remember saying that my mum said to me one day, look, you know, you just need to like let this go, like you need to not let it upset you anymore, because people are doing the best they can, they just don't understand it. You look, you know, you look kind of really good right now to that person, and obviously people would be like, what are you doing? Or you'd meet a stranger, you'd sit on, yeah, it was hard. So my whole kind of, for a long time, until I really had to sit down myself and be like, why am I so obsessed with this need to define myself by what I do? And I think, by the way, that's a really good question that actually I don't think I've ever really been asked that before. But God, that was probably one of the hardest things to have to go through in your 20s, because I felt, if I'm honest, I felt like a loser. I felt like a real failure. And I felt like it made me like less of a person than everybody around me. And it took me a very long time to come to terms with that. You know, I felt really embarrassed by it. But the truth of it was, you know, if we've got to unpack that from a societal terms, it's interesting that our whole definition of how we define a success of a person is by that. I mean, the truth of it was, if anybody was going through what I'd gone through, and you look at that journey, I was doing really well on what I was doing in terms of managing, you know, and showing up to each and every day, you know, like me, you know, sometimes I think I was so hard on myself, when actually me getting through the day, if I managed to do certain things, was actually like a real success. But I was basing my success upon these markers that society puts upon us. And you know, like I remember, like say I'd be with like a group of friends or go to somebody's wedding, I remember being like so embarrassed sometimes, because you know, they'd be like, you know, you'd be sat next to someone or be chatting to someone and they'd be like, what do you do? And it took me a long time to come to terms with that. But what it did do, by the time I hit my 30s, I was so professional answering that question that I no longer felt embarrassed by it. But it did, you know, I'm never going to lie to anybody and say that it was a walk in the park, because, you know, I cried a lot. And the stupid thing is, I wish I could go back to those. I have done, you know, I've done that. I kind of would like to go back to those younger versions of myself and just say to her, like, you didn't need to be so hard on yourself. Like, I get it, and I understand, and you will understand as well. You know, you're kind of moving into your 30s now. People are obsessed with it, aren't they? Literally, what's the first thing? If you sit down and meet someone and you start chatting to someone that you don't know, or you chat someone online, what do? It's like a natural.
Eventually, if it's not the first question, it's one of the first five questions, right?
It's
Like
one
it's
of
going
the
to be
first
at the beginning.
questions. And I said to my friends, who used to say to me, Hannah, you just need to get creative. And some of them used to be like, say you're just so damn rich. You don't need to do fucking anything, and like all these, and I don't know, it really gave me a perspective of how we. It's very interesting that that's still, well, it's not going to change, is it? And because it's human nature, it's life, and it's one of those things. But I do think with our children and with all, I think we need to remember, we need to define ourselves beyond what we do. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I took from that. Who am I beyond those definitions? Now, the interesting thing for me is I watched a lot of friends who became mums in their like later, like, you know, late 20s and 30s, and obviously it can be a very initiatory process becoming a mum. Obviously they tend to, like, you know, they're out of work or they're not doing their jobs. And I remember quite having a lot of conversations, because, you know, I was like the mum without the baby, going for the coffees with the mums because I was available. And I having a lot of conversations with being like, I never really understood what you were going through. You know, like they were there for me until now, until I'm suddenly without those, you know, the definitions of work, without the definitions of, you know, all of those things. And I think it's really important for us as humans. And if, you know, let this be an invitation for anybody listening, like, it's great to define yourself by, you know, what you're doing, your successes, but define yourself beyond that and know who you are beyond that, because it's so powerful when you do that. And I think it can be an incredibly life changing process when you do that as well.
Yeah, the burning question for me these last few years has been, who am I? And it's like an onion, right? You peel back the layers of each of these titles you give yourself. One of them being your job title, the other ones being, brother, friend, father, son, um,
Partner, if you're in a relationship.
partner. Yeah, exactly. Partner, author. You define yourself by the money you earn. You define yourself by your dreams and ambitions, and all of these things are great, but they're not you.
Mm.
They can be a part of you, but they're not actually you. You are spirit in human form having this experience, and
Yeah.
everything else is just an attachment that you add on whilst you're here. And that shouldn't be the thing that feeds you happiness. It's with or without that, there should be some level of, or absolute, not even some level, absolute contentment and acceptance and love. And the other bits are just fun parts of the adventure along the way to keep you entertained. But it shouldn't be how you define yourself. Because then once that thing goes, like you said about, the mums that you met, they then have children, the job goes, and they become a mum. And it's like, what does that mean? Who am I now? Because I thought I was this person who was socializing and going out, earning this money, and now I'm a mum. And it's like, am I good as a mum? Am I only a mum?
Yeah. Who am
What
I
does it
without that?
exactly? So even as a mum, it's like you're all of those titles and you're none of them. it's
Yeah.
it's how it's playing with that duality, right? And being fluid with it, and knowing that you're not just put into a pigeonhole just because you've entered a new chapter of your life or you've accumulated these things. It doesn't limit who you are. But the question nonetheless remains in most cases, right? Like, what do you do?
Yes.
It comes up because I think there's a sense of awkwardness that comes
Yeah.
up in conversation. So you jump to that question because it's like the question that most people can talk about a lot. And if you take that away from people, if you can't talk about your work, what else can you talk about? And
Well, yeah,
that's where it gets interesting.
and I had to learn fast, as you can imagine. So, and I did. And if you talk about being stripped back, basically what you talk about, all of those things taken away, I had all of those things taken away at, from like 17, 18. Like, that is harsh.
That's early. That's early. Yeah, before you've even fully formed your identity. Well, I don't
Yeah,
know when we actually fully form our identity, but that's an early time for that to happen, right?
yeah,
I felt a similar way going into my 20s, but 19, 20 on the borderline. The stuff that happened with my skin, which I've
yeah,
mentioned
cool.
many episodes before. And I remember clear moments where I was like, why doesn't anyone else have to suffer this? There's other people going out in their 20s, have no issues with their health. They're able to drink 7 days a week, party, and all that stuff. I'm like, I want to be able to do that. I'm going to study at the same time. I want to study. I'm enjoying what I'm studying, but I want to party as well. I want to go out. I
Yeah.
want to feel confident in myself. Everyone else seems to be able to do it. It was kind of this why me, and you go through that phase. And I
Ah,
and I,
God,
it's a necessary phase of that grieving process, or that journey, whatever you want to call it, right? Just a shedding of identity. You have to say why me, because you're so heavily attached to who you
yeah,
are. And
absolutely.
as that is being ripped away from you and evolving, you're like, why the fuck do I have to do it? But what you don't realize is, for most people, it's a blessing, because for most people, either that question never arises and that journey never happens, or it happens much later in life.
Mm. Yeah,
And
it does. And also, I think as well, when something happens to us physically, it makes us question our desire to the outside world. Like, like you say, when something so visual happens with your skin, it makes you question: is anybody ever going to desire me again? And do you know what? That, like,
mm,
I tied quite a lot of identity around my sexuality, and I found that really hard sometimes. Because I felt like I wasn't desirable to like the outside world. And I think as well that's another thing for us to unpack, because it, yeah, definitely had an,
definition of beauty.
yeah, definitely. And if you looked at me from like the, like I said to you, it was really kind of paradoxical with me, because I guess from the outside you would have looked at me and think, oh, there's a, fairly nice looking girl, um and she looks really well, she looks really healthy, um, and it's interesting how we even define people by that. Whereas I knew people like that maybe didn't look like that, actually were genuinely really healthy, but didn't look the way I looked. And again, it's taking back those standards and taking back those ideals and those ideas and stripping all of those things back, and us looking at them. And I get it too, like you say, like, if you're not in it, it can be really, and I, the one thing I always gave grace to, like, I knew my friend, like, I used to always, like, I never expected my friends to understand. So I never put that burden upon, I didn't expect them to kind of get it because I barely got it myself, I was going through. So I always gave the grace of, like, knowing, like, you know, if people did sometimes respond to me in a certain way, I knew it was coming from the best place. They just didn't understand.
Mm.
Um, and I think that's kind of the parts of navigating the journey as well. I often, as I say, cried at the strangers who'd ask those questions, or people you don't really know, you bump into on the street. Because I think it's human. I think it's frustration. You know what I felt a lot of the time. It was the frustration that I felt like I was trying so hard, and you probably felt like this with your skin as well sometimes. Like, I was trying so hard and things weren't happening in the way that I wanted to. And that journey, God, that journey of surrender, that process of, like, having to almost, like, take your hands off the wheel and almost, like, let God drive, like, with you. And God, it was like kicking and screaming sometimes. And having to meet myself where I was at in those places. But I guess at the same time, I can be grateful to be here today in this place and be able to share, to give, and also to give people the permission slips. Hence why I created Finding Grace, because it was that space of being able to give people those permission slips that, you know what, I'm not here to tell anybody it's going to be a walk in the park. I'm not going to say, I don't like to live by labels. And like you say, like, I sometimes we need a label for understanding, I believe. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. But I also think it's about not being totally attached to that. Like, the good thing for me, actually, when I got that label of that diagnosis, it was like, I can't even describe to you, like, the actual relief that I wasn't mad. Because I'll be honest with you, there were times in that early years I actually would question myself, is this in my head? Am I mad? I knew
Mm.
deep down I wasn't, but it left me on my knees sometimes begging that question. And sometimes we need to have those things to understand things, but it's how we place our attachments around them. We can use labels for empowerment, but just not let them totally define us and control us at the same time.
Yeah, I think it helps bring a sense of definition and understanding to whatever it is we're talking about. But then, as you said, being attached to or limited to that
Mm.
creates a negative impact or a limited impact in what it can do for us. And we may actually pick up and drop multiple labels along the way just to
Yeah.
understand who we are at different points. But like I said, I think at the very core there is no label that can define you, and
No.
it's being grounded in that, regardless of the labels that you pick up along the way. So you kind of have a sense of self. Basically, you have a sense of self regardless of the different labels that you pick up and drop along the way. Because for a long time, I thought, well, not I thought, I did feel like I hated myself and I didn't like myself and I thought I was ugly. And it took me a long time to look in the mirror because I was like, I don't recognize this person anymore. The
Mm.
before and after is so different that I can't bear to see eye to eye with myself. And it took a long time to then not only surrender and trust the process, but to change and evolve my definition of beauty and who I was as well.
Mm.
And as I evolved who I was, or my definition of who I was better able to come to a place of self acceptance. And then from that place, my definition of beauty also changed as well, because I was like, it doesn't have to look a specific way for me to desire myself, first of all, and love myself, but also for other people to desire you. Because you have this twisted, as you grow up, you have this twisted or conditioned view of what people find attractive as a
Absolutely.
guy and as a girl. And then you just think that's the only way, but that isn't the only, like, to be able to say that's the only way means that you've observed every single relationship in the world, every single point of attraction in the world, and you know that your way is the most popular way across amongst the whole world as to what is the definition of beauty. And that's not the case. That's stupid. There's 8 billion people in the world. So to think that your definition of beauty or what you think is attractive is what everyone else thinks,
Mm. And that was, the whole wheelchair thing, if I'm honest with you, that was really hard for me because I knew that it would change the way people would look at me and desire me. And in some cases, I actually did experience that, and that's like hard in itself. But I also recognize that it's also just fear and people not always fully understanding it. Like sometimes people have said to me, like, yeah, I might have judged that, but then I got to know you. And but that's very much there what you've said. Like, I guess what it comes down to, like, here's a really good example. So my friend's little girl has only ever known me, she's 7, so she's known me like this. So in her eyes, having someone in your life, meeting in the park, going out and about, using a wheelchair is totally normal. And she, went into a toy store a couple of years ago, and it's the first time they started, making Barbie dolls with wheelchairs, right?
I
And the
didn't even know
first,
that. Wow. Okay.
wow, yeah, so they've started doing that now. It's still very niche, but they're doing it, right? And she turned around very loudly. Oh my God, mummy, it's like Auntie Nanny. And you think about, like, I remember, like, I felt really heartened, but for her, that must have been like, oh, like, I can see my Auntie Nanny in that. Like, you think about it now. I don't walk past a shop window and see myself represented ever. I don't look at you don't look at a high end advertiser and see disability. That they're crossing a few boundaries now, but it's still very like we're not seeing that because and so in a kind of like what you say about beauty standards, what seemed as desirable, it's just not seen, I guess, as desirable. And it was one thing. It was interesting when I crossed over that barrier. I had all those issues, didn't I? What I was saying about looking good, and then people asking me those questions. As soon as I crossed over into that barrier of that wheelchair, I actually realised a very different world existed, and the the way people viewed me, even in terms of like relationships with people, like really insane things that you hear people say very loudly.
I was going to ask you about this. So now we're on this. Well, I guess we're talking about this chapter of your life where you're in the wheelchair and you begin to understand what the world is like from that perspective and what it's been like since. And so it'd be interesting to hear you talk a little bit about, like you just said, some of the crazy things that you've heard and the, the kind of early judgments and like preconditioned notions that they have around people who use wheelchairs or when they see you
Mm.
and how that conversation goes.
Mm. I mean, I think, generally, the first thing is that you suddenly realize that you get stared at a lot. And people don't always, like how we might be discreet at looking for something. The thing that's always fascinated me that sometimes people really aren't. And that fascinates me. And some of my friends have been going along sometimes, and one day a friend of mine was like, God, I don't know how you do it, mate. I was like, what? She went, I've just been really pissed off at people staring at you all the time. We're going over, and I was like, oh babe, I've got over it. I said I like it so much that I can get around. I don't give like a toss anymore, but I'm aware of it. And like on those more vulnerable days, like sometimes I feel like I have to take a deep breath and like just handle it. you know an ex-boyfriend of mine joked, like, because I said to him one day, like, people think you're a hero, don't they? Like, oh look, you stay with her, she's in a wheelchair, and people do that. Like, it's really messed up. And this might be if you're listening to this and you feel uncomfortable, I wouldn't think that. Like, it's not like a made up thing here. Unfortunately, people do think that. And a very good friend of mine and I were out to dinner in a very high end restaurant, and we had some people beside us talking really loudly about us, and we gave them some like comeback, not directly to them, but enough that they would have heard it. But it's insane to me that that is a thing. It's insane to me that I've been to places before and you ask for a ramp and people literally think you are literally taking the piss with them, and it's like, this is legal. And you go into a coffee shop, you'd be like, excuse me, do you have a ramp to get in? And they're like, no, we don't. Bye. I wouldn't have believed until I'd experienced those things countless times at airports, all of the spaces. I wouldn't have believed in the world we live in today that was possible until that happened. And I've
That
got
is
friends.
fucking mad.
It's mad. Like
Mad.
I've got friends who've become so obviously my friends who've been on the journey with me the whole time they've been. I've got friends who've only known me from this point. They become friends with me, and they were like, "I'll be honest, I didn't realize this existed. I thought we were way past this, Hannah." But it's not. I mean, can you imagine, like, V, you and I would go out for a coffee, and we go somewhere, and you go in and you say, "Oh, you got a ramp?" And they're like, "No." And then you somebody comes to the door. They don't say, "Look, is there any way we can help? Can I get you a coffee?" Instead, when you ask to see the manager, you get told the manager is too busy to talk to somebody like you. You never quite get used to that. And
Yeah, that is very surprising. Let's just leave it at that.
but I know
But it's a
I
reflection. But this is what I mean about like I don't want to take away from what you're saying, but this is where I begin to get engaged with what you're saying and really passionate because it then if you look behind the veil of what that is, it's the culture of the company and the mindset through which they've been trained and the
absolutely.
lens that they've been given about what actual customer service and building relationships is about. Like yeah, there's so
Yeah,
much we can say about
well,
that, but
exactly. I mean,
it needs to be a part of the DNA of how people operate within an organization. And if someone like you, for example, or someone in your shoes or similar, isn't able to provide that lens and advise when they're making certain policies or certain decisions, then they're always going to make the decision based on where they're at, thinking that that is going to naturally help it, like or include everyone, but it doesn't because they can't see the lens or understand your version of life because they're not in it. Like I can't. I wouldn't be thinking about things like that until I spoke to someone like you, where I'd be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. We need to actually factor in things like this when I'm setting up a business like a coffee shop because I would have never thought of stuff like that.
yeah, exactly. And you know what's interesting? Like there have been times in my life where it's been, say you've had a week of it. It happens. I've had a week of it. Bit of a week of discrimination, life in dis and you don't always find yourself like kicking up and complaining. And I remember after that particular incident, I actually burst into tears. Some days I can fight, some days I cry, some days I'm empowered. I was with my nephew and my mum, and I burst into tears. And
Is that
um,
the coffee shop?
and there was
Do
a
you
guy.
remember what coffee shop that was?
It was Cafe Nero,
Oh, okay, cool.
and
That's good.
I I
I like being specific about it because
yeah, it was
it
Cafe
just
Nero,
it's
but
just facts.
it did it the fact. So that there was a guy who said, "Look, I can help you get in," and I was like, "Look, I need to leave. I need to leave." And my mum, who's like,
But the guy who asked you, was he a customer or did he work there?
he was just a customer with his kids.
Yeah, see, yeah, see exactly.
Yeah.
So
So, but
it's
I said, "Look, I'm really grateful, but I need to leave this space. It's not good for my mental health." And I remember my nephew, because again, my nephew's only grown up with us. He was like, "Why wouldn't they let you in?" And how do you
mm,
explain to a 7-year-old? How do you explain that, like, we had to sit down and, like, tell him that's what the world's like? So I was obviously so upset. I go to the Lion King, and I'm then going to see my very feisty friend staying at her house, and I report to her what's happened. She wasn't best pleased because she's always got that. For any Dirty Dancing fan, she's always got that notion of no one puts Hannah in the corner,
mm,
and so she wasn't best happy. So she gets on social media, and
that's something I would do.
she went on a rampage. By Monday morning, I had a call from head office at Cafe Nero because, and obviously, as you can imagine,
Good.
I met a very patronising area manager called Jonathan, who and they got a ramp. As Jonathan said, "You're a change maker, Hannah. We've got a ramp." Jonathan, darling, it was illegal. You didn't have a ramp, and your PR people told me you did have a ramp and it wasn't working. He was like, "No, we never had a ramp." So, I mean, and that is one
That's fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, that is one incident. Look, here's another incident of not company. So that was Cafe Nero themselves not having a ramp. I go to the Shard, my sister and a boyfriend at the time. we go up there. Then we decide, it's a special birthday for my sister. We decide to go to the bar and celebrate. We're all
And for
dressed
those
up.
for those who are not in London or don't know London, the Shard is one of the taller buildings, and there's a bar. We're talking about the bar at the top, right, where you have the whole view of the city.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, cool.
we
Okay.
decide to go up there, and we get there, and we get to the kind of lift entrance place, and we were greeted by, oh hi, how can I help? And we were like, yeah, we want to go in, we want to go up. And he was like, oh, you're not allowed in here. No wheelchairs are allowed. And
What?
I was like, what? So
I
anyway,
should just throw him out of the top floor of the building.
so at the time, my slightly, my ex-boyfriend at the time he was fairly feisty himself. My sister had a glass of champagne or two. They weren't having any of it. They were like, nah, we're going up.
Yeah.
So we kind of get past him, and I obviously was having a mental health crisis by this point internally. I think as well because it's exhausting when it's like this isn't like one offs. This is like years. Like believe me, when you get years of chipping away of it, and this isn't like what I want to say as well. Like, and I've spoken to a really good friend of mine who's very high, got a fairly high profile in spirituality. This isn't people manifesting stuff, by the way. This is what's happening in the real world. And like me and him were talking about this because like about this idea that people are manifesting stuff. These are things that just need to be addressed within human society. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's really important to put that notion in. Yes, we can bring positive experiences to ourselves, but sometimes things happen and it's actually addressing beyond the stuff. And I do want to say this, but I got up to the Shard, asked them up there, just out of curiosity, and they were like, "Oh no, wheelchairs are allowed in here. Where'd you get that from?" And I obviously told them, but it was just too much for me mentally to be in that space.
So I would then think, okay, if they are either she's talking BS and she just made that up to not get in trouble, or that they are actually allowed and it's fine and it's part of the policy, but then they haven't been trained, all the staff haven't
Or
been
that
trained
guy
properly to
downstairs
understand.
had a problem, which it
Yeah.
turns out.
Oh,
So
yeah.
in his case, he actually, so this takes away individual internalized albinism, whatever that word is as well. So we left because I was like, look, I can't be in this space. Like, it's just not good it's not good for my well-being. So we left, and we all agreed it made us all have a bad taste in our mouth. Like, my sister wasn't happy. So we get out of there, and I was feeling really angry at this point. I wasn't, once I'd got over my little cry, I was angry. Like, I was angry that somebody thought that was okay to say. So I obviously took action, went, tweeted, and a friend of mine who runs a big company, I just like told him what happened, and he was like, "Oh, we're doing some like events," and he was like, "I'm gonna like email them, like this is like shocking, like not happy about this at all." Anyway, so I ended up speaking to the people at the Shard, and they were like, "Look, we're going to investigate this," and it turned out in this particular case that it was this person's own issues about disability.
Hmm.
So he'd allowed that, which is so crazy to even have this conversation that that was the case. So it's really interesting that you get kind of like that Cafe Nero incident was just really a very different energy to like that kind of an incident. And in it's kind of, you get like the what you say about the company. I mean, and it really does come down to like, the good thing is my friend Sam does always say to me, Hannah, you have to say something, because what you said about changing and giving them, how can they make changes if they're only seeing it from their lens? If you're just writing a pet, you need to go
Yeah,
in.
exactly.
And do you know what, like I've not based, I've got friends who, their whole life's work is pushing for change, and I really admire them, because it's an exhausting journey, and they are going in trying to, and it's you're meeting barriers and walls all the time, like, I think it can be, even in like big workplaces and firms, like you worked in
Sky.
Sky, and like in a lot of workplaces, a lot of places don't want to make adaptations for disability. a lot of the time because it can be a lot more harder work, a lot of the time because, you know, it culture change. You know, and I've spoken to friends of mine who runs big companies and stuff, and they've all said, you know, like, yeah, there's like a lot of work that needs to be done here. And it comes down to like the individuals, it comes down to the people at the top, it comes down to like the what you talk about, the kind of cross cultures within these workplaces. And you know, I again appreciate at the same time the complexities. But what I also have come to realize, because I've been in this long enough now, I remember when I was, you know, younger, using a wheelchair and experiencing some discriminatory problems at airports or issues. And I remember thinking, oh God, you know, I wonder what this will look like in 10 years' time. 10 years' time, it didn't look any different. And that really interested me when I suddenly, because I think naively, I thought, when I, you know, years back, I thought, oh, things are going to change. But it's been very interesting. It's to watch that those things haven't really changed. I mean, don't get me wrong, of course, you know, some things have, but even now, even only recently, I just couldn't be asked, because I just, you know, said to my friend, go in, like, even now people still like, oh, as if you're asking them the whole world, they've got to get their ramp out, you know. Bear in mind, for anyone listening, ramps are about £100 averagely, and you just open it up and you put it down, it fits on the top, and you can get in the place, and then fold it back up and put it in a corner. It's not, we're not talking, this isn't a big investment a company needs to make. You know, like, I went somewhere recently and I just couldn't be bothered to be dealing with the thing, and that happens sometimes. And you know, I think it just depends on what frame you're in, right? It depends where you're, where, you know, like, in terms of our nervous system, it depends where our resources are at, right? We have, depending on where we're at in any day, it's where our resources are at. And I think the biggest thing of this journey that I've been on is to not be hard on myself on those days, really learn to understand my nervous system. And this is something for us all to learn to do. Some days we're going to be very well resourced, some days we're not, and it's really, the more we can learn to understand and work with that, we can really open a key and lock to that.
How have you been able to work with the nervous system? Like, what's some of the stuff that you
Gosh,
have?
do you know what? It's been a really big journey, because one thing I realized, it took me years, because no one was really talking, you know, like, in personal development and in a lot of stuff, a lot of the time we're constantly kind of taught to push through stuff, right? Um, Even with our emotions and stuff. So I had this constant notion of, you know, like, almost like this very masculine approach to things, of like, oh well, I don't want to be not seen not to be, you know, being able to like deal with this emotional, like, go through this process, so I just need to push through, even though it would almost be like a voice in me being like, actually, I don't think I should be doing it like this today. And I really had to come back to my, I think it, you know, took me a long time to sit down and start to learn about trauma, how we hold things in our bodies, fight and flight. So I began starting to work with it by looking at, despite everything that I was doing, why I felt jacked sometimes, why old trauma patterns still were coming up, why I I didn't quite feel safe in my body, despite everything I did. So I think where it actually began was me questioning this idea of, how can I feel safe in a body that doesn't always present to me to be in the safest space. So I began to start working with this and questioning that, and from that space, really understanding what things felt like in my body, and really coming back to that kind of deeply, kind of somatically nourishing place. And it, you know, it was really revolutionary for me at the time, and this really, I've still been learning this in the last few years, because I think there'd always been this mindset of, come on, push through, you can do this, how much harder can you go, you know, it, come on, and this mindset we have to unpack. I know where that came from. I've always been wired like that. We're all wired differently, right? I was always that very driven person from growing up. It didn't come, I think some people are, some people aren't. It didn't come from my parents. I think I've shared with you before, V. I used to get up from the age of 7 every morning at 6 o'clock and practice my piano for an hour, right? My parents didn't make me do that. They had to listen to the piano at 6 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't ideal for them. But I was a driven person. So there was always this thing of like, I can do better. So it was really having to unpack where that came from. Working with my inner child. Starting to like slow down to really listen to what was going on inside of me rather than just being like, even down to things like meditation, like almost like being trauma informed in meditation, like how that some days our bodies need one thing and some days our bodies need another thing. Learning to understand our breath in context to everything that's going on around us, and what's happening in certain situations, and really being able to get clear in our bodies, because we're not taught that. Nobody teaches us in school, like, do we feel, and I think as well, like even in like relationships, you really once you start to do this work with the nervous system and trauma, you can actually start to realize, there's a really amazing quote that I love about having people in your life that feel good in your nervous system. I've not thought about that.
I saw you posted something about that.
I regularly like to remind and share people of that, because I think like that is like revolutionary. That is, if people really are listening here and they want to know what one of the key successes to their life is, get on your nervous system, understand your nervous system, understand what feels good in your body. Ask yourself that question: do I feel safe in my body? You know, and you talk about like where our needs are met and resourced, like how resourced do I feel in this situation that I'm in, like, and also understanding that not every single day of your life you're going to feel resourced. Now, from a perspective of a woman, our menstrual system and our bodies are very cyclic now, and this can even apply to men, like they go through their own cycles, but I think for as women we tend to have this very masculine approach, and it was only when I started to really understand and started to track my body and my cycle, that I began to even understand myself on a deeper level. And I'd always been very interested in the seasons, because I've always been into my, as I talk about to V, my witchy priestess side. So there's always been this very deep connected to like the wheel of the year and the seasons. And for me, the seasons have been very important as a way, as a constant. It's happening, whatever is going on for us, and this wheel turns throughout the year as a constant, but also starting to understand our own personal seasons and where we're at and how our bodies feel in that place, how we're feeling at that particular time. It was not something I'd explored despite all the personal development, despite, because it's very much like one step you've been there, V. I know you totally understand this. You've been on this path like me. When you go in, you and I'll like get right in down that rabbit hole. We'll go so deep, we're like down there, we're like buried to fuck. It's true. I know we're very similar like that. But at the same time, we almost have to unpack that as well and come back to this space of like, sometimes, and I know you've experienced this, when you just have to like have those days where you don't quite feel it. And if you think about it, most people are going into their workplaces too almost afraid to recognize that some days they're not quite feeling it. Now imagine how much more productivity we could get out of ourselves and out of workplaces if people were starting to understand this kind of stuff more, starting to understand that nervous systems more, where they could really allow that to integrate in their lives and what they're doing, and learn how to resource themselves and learn how to listen to themselves. Because it's all very well to listen to what we think we need to do, because even in spirituality, personal development, it's very easy to do the motions, the processes, you can be a pro at it, but you can still actually be very unresourced, have a jacked nervous system, as I discovered, and not be totally safe in your body. It's stripping back a deeper level and realizing a life beyond processes, formulas, and particular ways. It's stripping it back and going deeper into that space and giving ourselves that permission to almost open that layer that doesn't always have a precise formula or way of being, and having to be okay with that. Now, and very often most people tend to be pushed in that way because of a crisis in their life. But I think one thing that I try and encourage the people around me to do now, I ask them, how are you feeling today? In this idea of like, if you've grown up in a family where some people have not felt safe in their bodies from children and they don't even know it. And coming back to that space and doing the healing work around that can, I believe, be revolutionary.
There is so much to be said about kind of grounding yourself in your own body and feeling where you're at, and then addressing that, because we can get so heady about
Yeah.
doing processes and following a particular strategy and a morning routine and all that kind of stuff, which is good, but is it really serving you?
Yeah.
And those things are presented to us on social media, in books and stuff, as like the success formula.
Yeah.
And so you think you're a bad person if you don't do those things, but really that's not what's going to serve you at this moment in time based on where you are. And so what books necessarily can't help you with, or some books, most books, there are some that can, is to help you understand where you are right now
Mm.
and what do you need based on where you are now, because there's so many tools out there, so many things you can do, but they're not all for you.
No.
And just because it's worked for someone else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. You need to meet yourself where you're at, which is what you say a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it just starts with understanding who you are,
Yeah.
and how you're feeling about who you are, and addressing it one layer at a time. But it is the the deeper, darker stuff that needs to be addressed. I guess you could call it the shadow self, but I think that there is something to be said about addressing the unacknowledged self within you, which is the shadow self.
Mm.
And as you work through that, it creates a space for more light to shine through you. Because
Mm.
otherwise, you're doing all of this stuff, but you're building it on a foundation that's not quite stable. And
Yeah,
so,
and
how long is that really
that's
going to
what I
last?
did for That's what I did for years. And look, I know I'm personally quite a routinal person. Like I respond pretty well to routines, but I also have really had to recognize, like what you say, that sometimes it's not. It's about really learning to listen and go
Yeah.
deeper. And I likened it to a term that I coined of learning to dance to your own rhythm. Being a musician, understanding like everybody has
Mm,
different rhythm and a different pace. And if we look at if you look at an orchestral score where you've got all these layers of music, it blows my mind, no matter how much I understand and know about music and all of that, how all of these melodies and layers all link in together, the rhythms and the melodies all form harmony. And that's learning to dance to your own rhythm. That's learning to understand your own pace, and your rhythm is going to change throughout your life to what is going on, and about what feels good, about what doesn't feel good. But once we start to listen to the rhythm and I guess learn to dance, and most of us are afraid to learn to dance because we think we're going to be rubbish, right? I mean, I am telling you, I had to go to performing arts school. I was a rubbish dancer. I mean, I could do a bit of pole dancing and sexy dancing. Don't get me wrong, I'm always going to be a pro at that. But I was at the back of the class, like doing my Britney Spears dance, not living my best life. But it's showing up to the dance floor, in a word, and understanding
mm.
that we all have our own rhythm and pace.
Yeah, I love that. Tell me a little bit about your book.
Well, yeah, I've written a book, and it's a journey, to take that you take yourself on. That I use aspects of my story, aspects of what I've learned, and through what I come to realize, there are key words that we come across on any form of a journey we go on. And so I've used keywords from listening, surrender, forgiveness, grace, learn through the lens of love, and I've taken people on a journey. So that's in a nutshell what it's like, and it's taking people to really, in a word, have the permission slip to trust themselves a little bit better, meet themselves where they're at, and give themselves that permission slip to listen and to remember who they are. Because at the core of it and truth of it, with everything we've been talking about, at some point we have this moment, whether it's illness, whether it's grief, whether it's motherhood, whether it's a huge breakup, whether it's maybe a natural disaster, where we have to remember who we are. And I guess in a way the book is that reminder to remind you to remember who you are. And and I think like this, in a way, the biggest thing I learned along the way is learning to like yourself just as you are. Like, and that can actually be really, really, I think we're always learning with that in a way and in a word. But I look back to anybody that's watched Bridget Jones, and Mr. Darcy says to Bridget that he likes her just the way she is, despite all the actions. And her friend was like, he likes you just the way you are, not thinner, not this. And she was like, and they were all sat round there like amazed that somebody would say that to someone. And I think that is a metaphor for a deeper
It is, absolutely. Just accepting where you're at, and to
yeah,
have that from someone judgment free is like,
yeah,
what? Groundbreaking.
like someone you love, especially because obviously I guess in terms that he was this big shot human rights lawyer and she was this like, always like, I guess in her words, fucking up. And I guess it's like somebody turning around to somebody and saying, I love you just the way you are, is like, wow, really? Not, I don't need to be better. Because I think, especially for people like us, there's this constant notion, and I have to stop myself even now, where we want to do better. And of course, I'm always up for like refining things, and I'm always going to be learning and growing. But also, we sometimes need to stop and be okay where we are. And that the healing is in the stopping sometimes. The healing is in the pause. The healing is in the reflection. And just that I'm just going to sit with you in silence, or sit with you in grace, and sit with you in love, and we're just going to be. And I'm just going to like you or love you from this space. That's like, okay, maybe. And that's scary.
Yeah.
Within any form of our relationships, even our families, even our friends, like if a friend's having a bad time and you just sit with your friend and you're like, I'm not I went through a really shit experience 6 years ago, and I felt I would be really judged. And one of my I feel like she's so full of wisdom, one of my regular friends, the way she held and like sat with me and just like loved me at that moment, I understood love a little bit more. And I understood what it meant for somebody to be like, I love you no matter what, and I'm here. And that is so powerful. It makes me emotional almost. Don't want to cry on your podcast, babe.
I've had many people do that, so don't worry, you won't be the first.
Yeah, and but I think that's the thing. And there's as much power and grace in that as in the action. And it's that rhythm, right? Learning that dance.
It is, and I think it's deep down we all want to be seen and heard and acknowledged. But then it can be scary when someone's actually willing to do it, and you're like, oh
Oh
shit,
my,
this is the real deal. Wow,
the
okay.
real deal. Like, because imagine, like we all like, actually, you say this because I think that's what we all want. And then actually, I know people who've sabotaged, even friends who've been on self-development journeys, like
Absolutely.
who've said, like, when they've got into relationships and they're finally getting what they, they've put their dream man down, and then like suddenly he turns up, or this guy starts presenting in ways they've always wanted, and then they're like, trying to sabotage. Because it can be really scary when suddenly somebody's willing to meet us where we're at from that space, or like what you know before this conversation started recording, V and I were talking about the different. I mean, you made such a powerful point about our different definitions of love, and like what people want and how people view through their lens of love about where their needs are met, and essentially there is no right or wrong. And you know, like you said, you know, you likened it to, it could be remembering that 1 month anniversary, it could be that someone wants flowers every week, that makes a difference. Or you know, I think an ex of mine knew she likes being taken out to really nice dinner every now, you know, like that was a, you know, I can't drink, so it's kind of like a love language for me. And I think there are different ways, and when people start to do that or listen or even just, you know, be present, it can be pretty scary for people.
And that's a journey in and of itself, right? Learning what love means to you. So
Oh God, yeah.
yeah, but it is scary.
Oh God, yeah, like hell yeah, like that's kind of, I think for any of us, it makes me feel a bit sweaty thinking about it even now.
But before we wrap this up, I'm curious about what you're most excited about right now in your life.
Um, well, obviously, I'm excited about my book. I'm excited. I feel like I'm excited about. I've really connected to this idea of like arriving, and the freedom in that idea of that I'm not always looking for something to do. I'm not always looking for something to fix about myself. I'm really becoming present in that and showing up in the spaces that I'm in, and really honoring that and really presenting that to people to really give them the permission to do that as well. That's what I feel excited about as well. Yeah, and I think as well, like I feel excited about, yeah, the work that I'm doing in the world, from the podcast to the blog, to how, you know, I'm helping people. So yeah, that's what I'm excited about right now.
I love that.
Um,
How can people? So when did your book come out, first of all?
I'm in the kind of publishing whole room, so I don't know that answer yet. That
Okay.
we'll wait and see how that transpires.
Well, people will need to follow you and be on your newsletter to find out, right?
Oh my
So
God, V, you're
drop
giving
those.
that promotion. Pimp that
Drop,
promotion.
so
Absolutely.
drop the. So I'll put it in the details. You send it to me what you want me to add so that people can connect with you a lot better. But for
Give
those
us
that are listening right now, what is that? Where can people find you and connect with you? What's the
okay,
best place?
www.hannah-wallace.com. You can read, there is, oh my God, there's over 50 blog posts on there. And that in itself, the really great thing is they're like real bite size, or you can sit and really go down a rabbit hole and read. There's a lot of information there. The podcast is on there. And yeah, so that's like the best space for me. And obviously Instagram, I love interacting with people on there. Like come and find me there as well. And I think what I've really tried to do in the last years is really try and show all of me more. Like I was trying to be too professional at one point on Instagram and not show all of me. And I'm really, you know, I I even shown up with my seal when I was on TV a
Oh
couple
yeah,
months.
BBC Seal.
Yeah, like
Love
I
that.
even like
That was a good episode. I like
yeah,
that episode.
exactly.
It's the only episode I've watched of that show on BBC. What was it called? What's the thing called
Repair
again?
shop. Yeah, catch
Repair
me at
Shop.
the
Yeah.
repair
Didn't
shop.
even.
Yeah, and I mean the truth of it was like, and I think for me that was a really humbling and grounding experience, because it was out of the world that you and I are in, and it was really
Yeah.
great to be in a different world. And actually, like I love Snowy. Like bottom line is unashamedly, Snowy is the man. You know, he has been the main man in my life forever, unconditional, best boy in the land, right? And to
For
be able
people
to,
wondering, that's your a toy seal,
yeah,
your cute toy seal. Yeah.
literally. Um, and you know, like to actually go and have that experience with something that, you know, and that in itself, you know, we talk about surrender and emotion. What I hadn't realized going on that TV show was the actual journey of going and giving something. He was the one thing in my life, right, that I felt I had total control of and autonomy of, and I gave that over to strangers. And I didn't realize that journey that I'd go on, because I'd always known where he was, right? Even when he was really sick and falling apart, I'd always had control where I knew where he was, whereas, he was in my bed most of the time. But I didn't know where he was. And that was a really interesting experience to go on, that real surrender, to then have to trust that people are going to do something to your item that you loved, and you had to trust that. So I went on this whole spiritual journey over a teddy bear. I had no idea that I was going to. Who even knew?
Well, I'm glad you did. So now other people can watch it and be entertained and maybe have the courage to do the same with their toys and teddy bears. Um,
Exactly.
but Miss Wallace, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. It, we
We've
always have a
kept it
great
very
conversation.
clean as well. Like, how proud are you of me?
We have for the
My,
most part. For the most part,
my
we
angel
had a
voice.
few f bombs on there, but that's fine. That's like what this. I don't like to have these conversations too scripted or like
You should have
curated.
told me no swearing, because I would have not swore. Like, I'm really
No,
capable.
I did. No, swearing is allowed. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so what I'm saying is anything goes. This is what I said to you. I wanted to record from the moment you got on here, but you're like, no, I need to, I need to prepare myself. There's a few things I want to tell you first. So, but yeah, no, for the most part, anything goes. And that's how I've been kind of from the beginning. Is that I want it to be very transparent with people, because I feel like there's a difference. Most people who listen to podcasts will probably tell, who've been guests or have been on the other side of being a listener, is the before and after of a person who presses record. It can be very like formal and turn into this professional thing, and if that's what you're going for, great, but I don't think that's a true reflection of how the conversations go
Was
down, or
it?
of that person. I'm like, for me, I don't like to change who I am or try to be formal, so I'm glad you weren't. That's the whole
No,
point.
I mean, was it you that said that they were doing a podcast with me, and I've been like being like blah 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 blah, blah effing and blowing the no pressure, going like, hello, welcome to the Grace, and they were like, what the
I
fuck?
can't remember.
I don't know. I'm trying to remember. Oh no, it was my friend Johnny. Like, so he said it was the most funniest thing that he'd been like, the first time he met me. And like me and him were talking, and he said, then you press this button and
Yeah,
watch
so
this.
it completely changed into a different person. That's
Yeah,
funny.
I mean, I wasn't changing. I was just putting on. I'm an Aquarius. I've got like
Yeah,
many facets to myself. Like, there's a side to
you're
me that
multi-dimensional.
you know I'm multidimensional. Like, I put my halo and wings on for this episode for you.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Thank you so much. I'm sure everyone who's listening appreciates it, and more than anything, I do. So thank you so much, and I'm
My
sure this will be
pleasure.
one of
Thank
many.
you for having me.